Hello everyone. Since the last video, I have updated the UI a bit, messed with the game's core chopping mechanic, changed the way wood objects work, and created two brand new objects. So starting with the UI, I made a basic outline of how I want the level select screen to look. Each level that is not a tutorial will have a graphic to display how much of each bamboo type is in the level, denoted right now by the blank green rectangle, and there will also be room to display the level's leaderboard and high score. I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to handle the leaderboard display, so I stole some inspiration from the game Lovely Planet, which allows you to switch between global and local scores with a button press. I did that mostly because I was kind of attached to the idea of being able to navigate my UI with a keyboard only, but I think I'm realizing that it's more trouble than it's worth at this point. For one thing, I couldn't implement a scroll bar on the leaderboard that functions with keyboard controls, and also given the controls of the game, it only makes sense to have navigation controls that go left and right, since you only have your left hand and right hand pressing the different orientations, and not being able to quickly move up or down is pretty limiting. Also, if I end up actually making 50 levels, it would be too much work to scroll through all that, so no one would use it anyway. Basically, this UI is better than before, but it still needs some work. The biggest thing I worked on was changing the way the player chops the bamboo. Originally, as bamboo would come towards the screen, you would hold the button corresponding to the correct katana position, and then just let the bamboo fall onto the sword. Now you have to actively press the right button as soon as the bamboo comes within reach. I figure this will be a lot more engaging, which will help me reach my goal of getting the player into a flow state. I'm also hoping that once I add the music and sound effects, it will be a lot more satisfying because the player will be able to directly interact with the soundtrack as they chop the bamboo. Now, I'm not sure if I'll be able to pull off the music part very well, but I figure I'd rather try than to settle with making a subpar game. One big problem I've already come across is getting the timing right. In Unity, the smallest amount of time between two code executions is 1 frame. The problem arises when, for example, you spawn bamboo on the 32nd frame on 1 second, and then like the 33rd frame on the next second. There doesn't seem to be a way to precisely time things within Unity's API, although there are some .NET invokes and timer stuff I can apparently look into. For now, I'm able to get something that I can reliably move an in-game metronome to, but it's not actually timed perfectly, and if I can't figure something out, the plan will be to dynamically create music within Unity at every beat, the hope being that any small deviations from the actual rhythm won't be noticeable. My goal though is to make it as close to perfect as possible so I don't piss off any musicians or drummers who actually decide to play my game. Changing the chopping mechanic was then a catalyst for me refactoring other parts of the game. One stupid thing I should have fixed a long time ago was having different definitions for orientation throughout my scripts. So like half of them set the orientation 0 to 5 from left to right, while the others went in the order horizontal, diagonal, and vertical for both sides. I've now changed everything to the second method because it's easier to use with arrays that hold textures. Another thing I did was combine my 6 regular bamboo prefabs that only differed because of their texture into one single prefab. Along with that, I also made a generic script that would fade any object after it was chopped, since before I was basically making slightly different versions of the same code over and over again for different objects. There are 2 things I've learned from these mistakes I've fixed. One is that I understand one reason why they tell you to start with a really small project before making a real game, and that's so you aren't building off of these weird design decisions you make when you still don't understand the full scope of what you're making. The second is that I know I can't trust myself to fix non-modular code when I can quickly write something hacky to get around it, so I need to make sure I give myself dedicated refactoring days throughout development. The next thing I did was change the way wood objects work. In the last video I showed you those weird long bamboo objects that ended up not working because it was too hard to differentiate between the different orientations. I still like the idea of their mechanic though, where the player had to quickly mash one button 4 times. After thinking for a while and not being able to come up with a replacement, I figured my wood object would actually make more sense with that mechanic than the one they had at the time. So I altered the wood's chopping animation a bit and switched the mechanics over. The only bad part about this was that it led to me ditching my diagonal wood object, but wasn't really that cool anyway, so not too angry about that. So I had an object to go with the 4-button mash mechanic, but I still had the wood's old mechanic and no object to use with it. This led to me coming up with a new object I call the bar bamboo. The old mechanic from the wood had the player hold the button for one orientation, and after the wood was stuck to the katana, hit the button for an alternate orientation twice. So for example, to chop a horizontal piece of wood, the player would hold the horizontal orientation button, and then once the wood was stuck, they would hit the vertical orientation button twice. You can probably agree that that's not the most intuitive thing the player would think to do when they see a piece of wood, which is why I felt comfortable making this decision. The idea with the new object is that the player stops it by hitting the metal bar and then hitting the alternate orientation to chop the bamboo attached to it. I originally set it up to work with every orientation, which had to include 2 directions to face for each diagonal orientation, so the alternate orientation to press could either be horizontal or vertical. This ended up being way too hard to decipher quickly, so I ended up just getting rid of the diagonal versions entirely. I also had this problem where when the bar was stopped in front of the katanas, it was covered by the bamboo and it visually looked kind of weird. I couldn't completely fix it, but I got it a bit better when I made the nub on the end of the bar a bit longer. The final thing I did was make an entirely new bamboo type, which I call the time flip bamboo. This bamboo is hit normally the first time, and then it's flipped to the other side of the screen, keeping the same orientation. It takes half a metronome tick to reach the other side, so the idea is that the player has to do the final chop right on the downbeat. Other than making all the animations, it wasn't too hard to implement. The problem is that it's too hard for my brain to figure out. I think part of the problem is that the bamboo covers the screen when it moves from one side to the other, so that'll be the first thing I try to change. I may also need to just never allow 2 of these time flip bamboos to hit the screen at the same time, but I don't know, I'll have to mess around with it a bit. So from here, I need to finish updating the rest of my objects so they work with the new chopping mechanic, and I need to finish creating the rest of my objects. I actually have the ideas for my final 2 bamboo objects ready, just need to get those made and working. My big goal is to get the game to a playable state within the next month so I can start to have some people actually test it. This will involve finishing the tutorial levels, getting my chopping mechanic perfected, and adding some placeholder sound effects. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys later.